people are like,
No.
we had him, I think you probably met him, may not remember him at the point.
All good.
You think so? My priority here is just to have a conversation with you, and let's just talk like we're sitting around and having a beer. This like a beer with Rich or something like that. And
Sure.
I've got this thing right here. My wife says that if it gets much bigger, she will be cutting something off in the middle of the night. She didn't tell me what. Hey everybody, it's Rob Seaver. I'm bringing you this week's on-air podcast with, I say it all the time, one of my favorite people. This is truly, again, one of my favorite people, but I say this because when I met this guy, I met him in an environment where I was also pretty new. I was trying to figure out things, what was going on, and I remember sitting down with him for the first time, I believe was in New York, talking about what he wanted in the industry, talking about what he was doing for the industry, and then talking about the council. And so without further ado, I want to bring you Richard Kahn, Rich Kahn. He is the CEO and co-founder of Anura.io. Rich, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, you know, the way that these have been working, and I've been trying to get better at these, but I want them to be really conversational. I want people to understand more about Rich Kahn than even they know about Anura. And so the way that I start these a lot of times is I go way back. I go back to the fact that it looked as if online you went to a community college called Rockland Community College and majored in business management. Is that correct? Was there more to that story or less to that story, or is that all the story?
There's more to the story.
Tell me.
Yeah, so essentially, my goal was always to go into robotics engineering. I wanted to build robotics for home use and for medical use. And I wanted to work on AI and all this really cool kind of stuff. So where do you go? I applied to the one college at the time at a high school that offered electromechanical engineering, as they called it. They didn't call it robotics engineering back then, which was MIT. And I got accepted. And I got the congratulations, you've been accepted. It's $29,900 a year, whatever it was back then. And I'm like, this is great. I'm 17 years old. I'm living on my own. I was kicked out of my house when I was 17, so I'm literally just making money to pay for food and for rent. I go to my guidance counselor, figured this would be a good idea. So I sat down and said, yep, I got accepted to this school, and how do I pay for it? She says, oh, just ask your parents. I'm like, not an option. I explained the situation. She's like, oh, well, then I guess you can't go. That was literally the response. No like financial aid, because I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't know anything about it, and I had nobody to ask about it. So I figured, let me try going to the community college, because Rockland Community College was right up the street from us, and they were a good, solid school for a bunch of different things. And I'll go in to take as much of the programming and engineering classes that I can, see if I can finagle something, and then try to reapply to MIT and go back to MIT. So I get in there, and I'm literally teaching the professors the languages. I mean, I was programming since I was 9 years old. So I'm sitting there in class, and I remember, I'll never forget this one Fortran class. Get this Fortran class, and the woman puts on the chalkboard, because we had chalkboards back then. She writes 20 lines of code on the screen, and she's going to break it down on this little program that she wants us to write. And I said to her, and this is like, I want to say this is like the first week, and she's trying to like these are the kinds of things we're going to be doing by the end of the semester. She puts the code up on the board, and I'm like, I asked a question. I said, I have a question. I said, not for nothing, but normally in programming, you know, RAM, machine code, operations per second are all very precious. So you got to write your code to accommodate that. And why are we doing it the long way? And she says, I've been doing this. I've been teaching this class for like 15 years. This is the shortest way to do it. I said, no, it's not. You got way too much information going on and too many cycles being chewed up by the computer to make it the efficient way. So she goes, here's the chalk. Go ahead and show me. So I went up, I erased a small portion of the board. I wrote 4 lines of code, and I looked at it and I said, that should do it. She ran over, she looked at the code. Then she had to pull out the computer to fire up the computer to see if it worked. Find out it worked. Then she looked at me and she said, you're right. That is more efficient. So I grabbed my books and I started collecting. She goes, what are you doing? I go, I'm done with this class. I'm out. And a story like that happened in every one of my engineering classes, or programming classes.
Oh no.
So then I started looking at the space. I'm like, okay, so what's really going on in the area of robotics? And I knew I wanted to go into robotics engineering, but I also knew I wanted to make a lot of money. The two at the time did not fit. So I looked up, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he was making $65,000 a year, and he was the highest paid robotics engineer in the country. And I said, it's not enough. I got to drop this course. So I decided to switch over to business management, get my 2-year degree, and go off on my own. There's always more to the story, right?
Yeah, I mean, Paul Harvey, right? And now that's I've talked to a lot of people now, and it's been interesting to see the path that people take, especially where the end result is right now. And so to come back and hear that, simply amazing. I mean, I did know that you programmed. You did talk about that in our first conversation, that some of the original code, is from you, and I know that. And so, the other side of that is that fast forward again back to today, that business management. And now I do know that in a lot of these courses, what you learn from a business management MBA type courses, things like that, very little is applicable when you actually get out to the real world, but it does set the foundation, I would suspect. Back in those days, learning about business management, was it something right out of, because I'm going to go through historically where you've been, because it's a long storied career, but at the end of the day, did that basis of those 2 years in business management or getting that degree, does it still apply today? Was there any emphasis on education back then that you're still getting value of today?
No, because like everyone knows, your first 2 years of school are kind of your core courses. And I spent a year in robotics engineering, so I had a lot of engineering courses, and I took calculus 1, 2, 3, and differential equations. Hated it, never understood it, probably never used it again in my life. But I took a lot of engineering courses, and when I switched over to business, there was only a couple business courses that I needed. You needed like science for a business course. I'm like, and my programming courses didn't count in sciences. So I took inorganic chemistry, loved it. So I took inorganic chemistry too, just because the teacher was phenomenal. I enjoyed it. Never used it again, but it was more like for gene therapy and stuff like that. It was just, I enjoyed it. It was or organic chemistry, I think it was. And then I wanted to take a course with my wife, or soon to be wife. So we took floral design together. Outside.
How did you all court back then? What was the class called?
It was called floral design.
Floral, like flowers, or
Yep, you bet.
floral design. My gosh.
So give me a pot, give me some flowers. I can cut them up and shape them up and make them look nice. But what was interesting is we took the course because the course was taught by somebody who owned one of the top floral companies in the area, and we wanted to use her for our wedding, because we were planning the wedding, and we wanted to use her for the wedding. So we took the course, and she took a liking to us because the two of us together taking a class. I'm an engineering student, she's a nursing student, yet we're in a floral design class together. And so she gave us a really big discount when it came time to doing our wedding. So it worked out. But going back to your original question, I steer off a lot. That's just how I am.
I don't remember the original one, so help me.
Do I remember, or am I using a lot of the education I took in my business management? The only other course that I can recall taking that wasn't a core course like math, science, English, writing, stuff like that, that was actually a business course, was I took micro and macroeconomics. And I remember this one teacher that we had, and I asked them, and I'm a young kid, I'm smart ass, and I said, they always, I don't understand, you're here, you're an older gentleman. We were talking about something, it was all in good fun. And I said, they always say those that can't do teach. So why are you teaching? You have all this information, and where's it coming from? And he's like, oh, he goes, that's actually a great question to ask. And he owned like several multi-million-dollar companies throughout his life. He had a very successful career, did phenomenal, retired a little early. And 6 months being home, his wife said, you got to do something, you drive me insane, get out. So he says, I'll teach. So he was one of my best professors, and because he had so much knowledge, like hands-on experience knowledge about business, and it was a phenomenal course, learning about economics and stuff. There wasn't a whole lot about business management courses that I was able to take, because again, the first 2 years are all about those basics.
Yeah. So that wasn't a backhanded comment when you said those who can't do teach?
No. I remember the conversation. We were all having fun, laughing at, you know, different things about his career because he didn't disclose most of it at that point. So I brought that comment up, and that spurred him to say, okay, let me give you a little bit of my background. And that's when he disclosed his background and was like, wow, this is, you know, because for a community college, you don't typically get the top end professors.
No.
Right? You know, people want to teach at Harvard and MIT. They want to be at those levels of school. And, you know, for him, it was just a part-time job. This was just, I'm going to teach a couple courses, get out of my wife's hair for a couple hours a day. And that's why he did it, because he's like, I don't need the money. I've retired, you know, and and once he established that, you know, I think everybody in the class enjoyed the class that much more, because when he said, remember the movie Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield? And he's in that business class.
I remember what I remember from it, yes.
And he's basically, the business teacher is teaching him, oh, we're going to build a fictitious, you know, product company. We're going to set up a marketing structure and a warehouse. And Rodney Dangerfield's like, wait a second, you're missing a bunch of stuff. Like, he's trying to give him some real advice. But so that's kind of what happened with this class. The guy turned around and literally gave us his background. So now when he was talking about something, it was from experience.
Yeah.
Like this, and there was times where he would say, okay, this is what the book says, but this is really what happens in the real world. And you could appreciate it and understand it because you knew his background.
You know, I feel that formal education fails so many students because they can't add that context, that applicable experience to what they're teaching. And so therefore, for somebody like myself, I could not wait to get out of school because I could not earn money inside of school, and could not get a car because nobody in my house was going to pay for the car. So I needed to go out and find a job. Now, you know, 2020 in rearview mirror says I should have paid more attention. I would have loved to have paid more attention in math and English and grammar because it hits me every day. But the thing is that no teacher that I could remember could apply what they were trying to get me to understand to something real world. And so, especially as I got out of regular math and was pushed into algebra for the first time in like 6th or 7th grade, I was like, this makes zero sense, total waste of time. I need to go make money. And I did. And so, you know, I do envy the fact that you had somebody along the way that was so instrumental in helping you understand the application side of what they were trying to teach. When you were younger and you said you had been coding for years before you got into the school, like, did you have a Commodore 64? I'm just trying to understand. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you did. Of course you did. Yeah.
The school I went to Rockland. I went to Rockland. I was in Rockland County, so that area was tend to have a wealthier. Average person was on the wealthier side. My family wasn't. We were on the lower end of the side. But the schools always had the newest and latest, greatest equipment. So in the 4th grade, we got introduced to it was actually called the Commodore PET computer. I don't know if you remember this. It was a green screen.
PEC or PET?
PET.
Okay.
Right. It was basically a green screen, probably about 10 inches big, built into the computer with a tape drive. And
I had a Trash 80, you know, a TRS 80. I don't know if you saw it in that Tandy Radio Shack for all you young kids who've never heard of TRS.
I remember those.
Yeah.
Or the How about the Tomic Sinclair 1000 was the first personal computer for under $20.
You're kicking it old school there, brother. I have no memory of that.
But it was funny. So yeah, so we started off with a PET computer, and I was in 4th grade, and I wrote a game that I had to stay in and present to. It was parent teacher night, and the kids weren't allowed to be there, but I had to be there because none of the teachers could explain what I wrote. So I actually built a game on the computer. But yeah, so moving into more of the serious programming, my uncle had bought us a Commodore 64. And
serious programming, serious power.
But you know what? That computer, for its time, it lasted 7 years before something came along and replaced it.
Oh yeah.
You can't find a computer nowadays that takes 7 years to get replaced. Technology is moving so quick and so fast. Back then it wasn't, and that computer was so far ahead of its time that what you can do with 64K of RAM and technically it was only 32 because half of it was ROM, the operating system running in the background, was amazing. So we did a huge amount. In fact, I ran my first, what you would call a website today, they would call bulletin boards back then. This was the 80s.
Yeah, BBSs, yeah, for sure.
Right? So you'd have to physically dial the phone into my computer, and I had 2 phone lines coming in, 2 floppy drives, because that's your only storage point that you had. And people can come in, upload software, download software, send email. This was back in the 80s. And I remember the name of the
I remember them vividly. There were some 900 number BBSs that were available at some point in time. Just I heard about them at some level, but yes, I do remember the BBSs for sure. Did your Commodore 64 have a cassette drive tied to it as well?
No, we went straight when we got the computer bought for us. We went ahead and went straight to floppy drive at that time because it was like it was actually almost the same cost as the tape drives. But they were the newer technology.
It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, floppy disk. Was it the big 5 1/4, the 10 1/2? What was the size of the disk?
It was actually 5 1/4, and it was called the Commodore 1541 hard drive. It was called a hard drive, even though it wasn't a hard drive.
That's amazing. I know that some of the people listening are going to be like, this is too old school for us. But at the end of the day, for me, it's really it's comforting to know that somebody was back there, because I grew up in different worlds, and a lot of my friends, they were doing Dungeons and Dragons at the time, and rolling the old school dice. And so I had a T1000, which was another Radio Shack computer, an early PC model, the way that it looked in today's world, very similar. But I had learned BASIC or whatever the language was at that time that came on the computer, and I wrote a real rudimentary one, Hello World, of course, right? And then I wrote something that would automate the roll of the dice. It turns out that's really anticlimactic to somebody wanting to play Dungeons and Dragons, but I did write a program, and then I played the world of Zork, which I don't know if you remember, a game called Zork. Walk to mailbox. You see a mailbox, open up mailbox, mailbox is open, look in mailbox. That was the gaming.
That was the predecessor to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Or Leisure Suit Larry, and the land of the lounge lizards, which was another game that we played so often back then. Well, look, I have enjoyed this trip down memory lane. Have you been in Delaware the whole time, or I mean, Maryland?
No.
Where have you lived all along?
I was born in the Bronx.
Oh.
So I moved up to Rockland County, or New City, when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. Stayed there through high school. Once Beth and I got together, we moved into an apartment in the same vicinity as in Rockland County. And then once we bought our first house, we bought it up in Orange County, New York. Started there, stayed there for about 5 years, and then decided, just for the hell of it, let's move to Delaware. So we did some research, because our parents had literally moved to South Carolina. And we always wanted to move out of the New York hustle and bustle. So we decided to compare all the cities between where we lived and where the parents lived, and that had good schools and low crime rates. We found something like 20 cities. One summer, our vacation was one day we would go visit each one of these cities. And I think we ended up visiting like 15 of them. Fell in love with Delaware. And I'm like, do we really want to move? We just finished off the pool, the deck. Everything is like just the way you want it. It's a nice house. And then we had a snowstorm, typical for New York. I was about 1.5 feet of snow, and my daughter had to get rushed to the hospital. So we had a 135-foot long driveway that we had to shovel out our minivan to be able to get to the main road.
Oh my gosh.
And as we're shoveling and we're rushing because we got to get our daughter to the hospital, I said, when this is over, call the real estate agent in Delaware and find out if they had any snow. So when everything ended up being okay, so we called up and they said, no, we had a dusting, it was gone by lunch. I'm like, we're moving. And we moved. No family, no friends, no job, nothing.
Oh, wow.
Just picked up and literally
And
moved.
haven't looked back since, huh?
No, love it.
What year was that?
That was 2000.
So I mean, you've been there a couple of decades. So you're almost considered a true native now, right, of Delaware?
It's funny because our town, when we moved into it, had 4,000 people. It was a small town. Right now, I think I just saw the census. I think it was like 23,000 people. So it's still a relatively small town, but it's grown a lot. So
Mm.
Like I said, we're about as native as you get.
Well, I want to get down and talk a little bit about that pool you lost in New York and what you gained in Delaware. We will talk about that here in a little bit. As you left school, and I tried to follow your chronological order of job after job. One of the things that caught my eye is right out of school, and it could have been while you were in school. It said that you basically were an owner of an e-magazine. So what's that all about? Because I
Yeah.
mean, I knew what year was that and what was the e-magazine and how did that work out?
1993. So look at history for the internet. The internet was rolled out as publicly available internet. Like when I was going back to the other, the bulletin board system, that was part of the ARPANET system. That was the predecessor to the internet. Very different system. So the internet was rolled officially to public use, and I think it was September 1st of 1991 was the official date.
Hmm.
1993, I got wind of it, and I'm like, wait a second, computers can talk to each other on a network. I gotta be part of this.
Yeah,
So of course, in order to use it, you had to be a techie because there was no browser, there was none of that stuff.
that's right.
It
Yeah,
was all, you would
command
log into
line
your
driven. Yeah,
computer.
yeah.
You would say, and I remember saying, they have pictures from the Hubble telescope in a library of Japan. And I remember this. It says, okay, to get to Japan, you have to log in from this server to this server. Here's the information. From this server to this server. So it was like 4 or 5 servers to get to the Library of Japan. Then have to file out, go to the right computer, go to the right directory, and there's the picture. So great, download the picture, and it would download that to your ISP. And it would happen fairly quick because they were on the internet, all internet interconnected. And then when you were done, you could log off each server, come back to you. So now you're basically logged into the main ISP that you had at the time, which was probably like CompuServe or something like that. And you could say, okay, anything in my file directory, download to my computer. Then you go off and have dinner while it's downloading, come back, and it's like, oh my God, a picture from the Hubble telescope. It only took me like 3 hours. And I'm like, I'm
Two of which
hooked.
was just getting connected.
Right. I'm like, I'm hooked. This is it.
Oh
So I
my
said, you
gosh.
know what? I was trolling in the AOL chat lines, chat rooms. They used to have these chat rooms all over the place. And somebody was talking about setting up a newsletter where they can talk about sports or something. I'm like, you know what? I'm not much of a writer, but I would love to write about all the stuff I'm learning about on the internet. This thing is going to take over the world. Like this is the way things are going. So in 1993, I set up. It went through a couple different name changes, but I think Infonet Easy, I think was the last name that we had for it, whatever the name was. And I went to the group and I said, hey, I just started a newsletter. I'm going to send it out by normal email. Normal at the time, right? So if you're interested, just give me your email address and I'll add you to the list. It was an opt-in list. And within a short period of time, I had like 20,000 people registered for this newsletter.
Holy cow.
And all I was doing was writing a newsletter that was a couple pages long of what I learned that week that's going on, like who's coming out, what's changing. I even remember putting an issue out later on when Yahoo announced their 10,000th website in their directory.
Wow.
So this is all that predecessor. So I've been writing this article, and then somebody hit me up. He said, "Is there any way I can advertise in your magazine?" And I'm like, "I'm doing this for free right now. It's like I'm not making any money. I'm just doing this because that's kind of cool, right? That's why most technology start on the internet because it's kind of cool."
And we didn't have online influencers back in the day.
No.
So like there wasn't predecessor to say, oh, I could monetize this.
Yeah, so what was happening is each week the subscription base was growing because friends were telling their friends like, oh my God, you got to get this newsletter. All you got to do is go here and sign up for it. Just send your email address to this address. And I would go in there and scrape all the email addresses, load into the database, and it was growing. So I said, sure. So I'm like, God, what do you charge? So I'm like, well, in the newspaper, when you advertise in the classified section, they charge $10 per line, minimum 3 lines. I go, sounds good. We'll do that. Next thing you know, I'm bringing in like $500, $600, $700, $800 in pure cash each week.
Oh my gosh.
People are advertising, and it just started to take off. And I'm like, wow, this is great. And I wasn't paying attention to numbers because again, I was doing it because it was kind of cool. And I just kept loading money into the account. And I remember one time Beth turning around and saying, oh my God, they finished the house up a little sooner than expected. We need a couple thousand, we need like we got to come up with $5,000 in order to be able to pay for the next day. I'm like, hold on a second. Yeah, I got that in the account. Here you go.
Oh my gosh.
It was coming in fast. So then I had one of my guys said, because now we move into like 1994. October 1994 is when the first web browser came out. At least that's the best I can remember. And my first browser, as soon as I heard about it, I'm like, oh my God, I got to have one of these. It'll make life so much easier. And of course, there was nobody out there that had a web cert, but they were just starting. And my first browser version was Netscape 0.93 Alpha. It
I
wasn't even
remember
publicly
didn't it
released.
have the little like logo that was I forget, like almost nautical theme or something, Netscape. I just remember Netscape. I
Yeah,
remember
Netscape.
it.
Yeah, it was just a very, very cool thing to have. So we started running through it. And like I said, I remember SEO. Oh, everybody's into SEO, right? SEO 1994, 1995, I should say, probably 1995, mid 90s. All you have to do is have your domain name start with a 1, and you're at the top of the list.
It's like the brand new version of the old phone book, but way before its time. That's awesome.
Well, let's face it, Yahoo was the 800-pound gorilla at the time for search, and they were a directory. They weren't a search engine. So everything was alphabetized just like Yellow Pages.
Yeah, I
So
remember.
if you
Well, I
typed in,
remember Alta Vista also at that time was another big browser or search engine at the time as well.
they were a client of mine at one point.
Really?
They had,
I know.
yeah, so essentially, so I remember them announcing it, Yahoo had their 10,000th link and everything was growing. And one of my guys said, hey, you should set up a web mall. That's the newest thing that everyone's setting up is these web
A web
malls,
mall?
a web mall, and then host stores in there so people can actually go shopping. And if you do, I'll sign up.
Amazon.
So I'm like, you know what? Let me test the waters. So I sent out a message to everybody. And at this point I had set up, for my email newsletter thing, people could fax me a check. It was called check by fax back in the day. They'd send you a check, you type in the numbers, you print out a check, cash it. That's how you took electronic payments back then. So I went ahead and
Before TCPA, by the way.
yeah, way before TCPA. I sent out a letter to everybody and said, you know what? So one of my readers suggested that I set up a mall, so a web mall, and I'm planning on doing it. I'm going to build a mall. I'm going to host sites, and I'm not sure how to do this yet, but I'm going to get it done. So if you're interested in signing up, send me a check for $150, and I will build the site, 3 pages. Your basic title of the information you have and a contact us page. I'll host it in the mall, give you some traffic. I'll host the whole website on my server, and if you're interested, send me $150. That week I got like 60 checks.
Wow.
So I'm like, so
How did you fulfill the demand?
my mother-in-law is like, you can't take their checks. You don't know what you're doing. I go, but I'll figure it out. For like 8 grand, 10 grand, I'll figure it out. So I went ahead.
Your mother-in-law, right? Is that what you said? Your mother-in-law?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were living at our house as we started this project because we're waiting for the house to be built. So anyway, so I will run to the store. I find out HTML, for dummies. I get HTML, intermediate and HTML advanced. And then I bought some graphic manuals, some graphic software, and I read 2,000 pages that weekend. I took the week off from work because I was working for Verizon back in the day. Took a week off from work. I built the mall and all the websites in 3 days. Launched them all, and we started making money. And it was growing. It was a growing company. It was my first company called First Street Internet. Because one ST Mall, one was the top of the search engine, so I'm guaranteed traffic. So if someone looked up mall, we were the first guy on the list, and our clients were closing deals, getting orders and growing, and the mall started to grow. That later became an ISP where I ran 300 phone lines into my house.
Wow. You were a server farm way before server farms were a thing. Man, it's incredible. You skipped over something that, just briefly, because I saw that also in your history, somewhere along the way you stopped to sell phones for Verizon.
Yeah.
And what was it? Just a money grab, or was it just curiosity? What drove you to something like that? I mean, it doesn't seem to match with everything else, other than maybe you saw something about cell phones that others didn't. I don't know.
Yeah, it was money.
Okay. Damn. I was hoping for a sexy story.
What does Mr. Wonderful say from Shark Tank? It's all about the money.
It's all about money.
No, I did that because I needed a job, and Verizon had amazing benefits. And this is the time where it was originally Bell Lennox Mobile, then Bell Lennox 9X Mobile, then 9X Mobile, then eventually it came up with Verizon. Just finally sticking with one name.
Yeah, all the local companies, regional companies, all kind of started morphing, into that, and eventually became either that or AT&T at some level.
But I actually joined them because I wanted to get into the computer department. So I
Mm.
figured they didn't have any openings in the computer department, and somebody suggested, well, if you get into one of the other departments, they like to move people around and put the best person in the best location within the company. I said, perfect. So I started off in sales, and cocky person that I was back then, I said to the manager, I said, all right, who's the top salesperson? Oh, it's this guy over here. I'm like, great. Tell him he's not going to be the top salesperson inside of 3 months. And they
So you've
said,
always been cocky and kind of assertive. I'll call it assertive.
pretty much, you got to have a little
Heavy on
confidence.
the assertive side of it.
So yeah, it was one of those things. 3 months later, I took his numbers down. I actually doubled his performance,
Oh
and
my God.
that
It's a,
was Verizon.
I've interviewed so many like top leaders in the space, executives, CEOs, C levels, whatever. And one thing that's really consistent about all of the stories is that tenacity as a younger, person, even in elementary school. I've heard some just amazing, like, well, I did this. It reminds me a lot of Gary Vaynerchuk, where he was selling baseball cards and mowing lawns and just bankrolling that so he could get more, inventory to bankroll that to get more inventory and grow. And I just, a lot of people I think wake up and a lot of times they either resent or, they feel like there's a chip on a shoulder because, they look at what you have and they look at where you are today and they just don't understand that journey. They don't understand every nuance and every punch in the gut and every risk that you've taken, and I want to get into some of that a little bit, but you know, I just found it interesting how I would call you a serial entrepreneur, and I don't know if that offends or not, but when I look at the C's and the presidents and just the ownership, the co-founder, the founders, in your entire list of jobs and positions that you've held, they've always been to me a stepping stone to that next level. And so for me to sit back or to look at the things that you have and resent it or resent you for it, telling that story and being able to see it firsthand and sitting here now with you is pretty amazing to be able to connect the dots to know why you're able to enjoy this. I want to talk about something with you that has been interesting to me. You're a pilot,
Yes.
and where did that come from? Like, how did you go from coding on a Commodore 64 and telling your teacher in college that they're an idiot, I mean, whether you said it or not, walking out on them within seconds pretty much set the tone for that. And then, selling phones and running an online web mall in the early days and BBSs. Where did Pilot come in?
It's interesting because essentially I started my first flight lessons when I was living in New York, and literally, I'm trying to remember. It was just something that I just wanted to do, something different, something so different than all the other stuff. Because I have a lot of other stuff that's very different in my background, like martial arts for decades. Um, Actually, interesting story on martial arts. I was invited to the 2000 Olympics to compete for
Wow.
America's team. Um,
That did not come up in the research.
I bet you it wouldn't. It was one of those situations where we had just had our second child, or Beth was pregnant, and two of us from the school. There was like 3 or 4 schools that our team that our senseis ran, and they were responsible for setting up Taekwondo in the Olympics. And the first year was going to be the 2000 Olympics. So they said, we're going to put together a team for America. We need six players on the team. Feel free to pick 2 from your school. So they gave him 2 open seats. So he invited me and a friend of mine, both worked at Verizon, to compete. Basically, we would spend 2 years out in a hosted family out in Korea, and they would literally train us 8 to 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, and get us ready for the Olympics. And I wanted the opportunity. I wanted to be able to do it. So same with my friend. The 2 of us both wanted to do it, and we sat down and I remember having a lunch with him and thinking, man, how cool would it be to be on Olympics, blah blah blah, and this, that, and the other thing. And then we sat down to a shake of reality. He had just bought a house. He was married. They were planning on having kids. I already had my daughter and I had my son on the way. And how do you just drop everything in your life for 2 years? And to me, it seemed a little selfish at the time. Like I
Were you a
wanted,
black belt? I mean, I would
yes,
assume, or
yeah,
I
it was
mean, I
black
don't
belt.
know all the belts, but I mean, you were a
Yeah,
black belt.
yeah, both of us were, and it was only open to black belts and above. Um, so we were, the two of us like really sat and thought about it and then talked to Beth about it. And if I would have said, let's go, she would have been, let's go. But
Mm.
to me, I felt like it was selfish because I have wife, I have 2 kids that I'm responsible for. We're in the process of building a home. How could I just drop everything for something for me? I'm responsible to take care of a family now. So I opted not to take the opportunity. And that's one of those
Yeah.
things that I always think back in life that would have been kind of cool to have been an Olympian, you know?
Yeah, I don't know that you would be where you are right now, but I mean, certainly every decision that we make certainly carves out the future of where we end up. And so it would have been interesting to see, the what ifs for sure. I can appreciate that. But you then decided, okay, I'm not going to be a world-class Olympian. I'm going to fly. First of all, what year was this that you were talking about, having the itch to fly?
I want to say it initially started, I'm probably thinking late 90s.
Oh,
Uh,
did you watch Top Gun in the mid 80s?
well, I mean, yeah, I watched Top Gun, like who hasn't, right?
Yeah.
But it was just something I was like, and honestly, I really like helicopters. That's
Mm.
more so than a single engine plane. So back then, it was just something different. Like I wanted to try because I was always into like martial arts and just things that were very different than the normal, you know, hobbies and stuff like that, right? Things that you
Mhm.
can do. So I figured, why not try my hand at flying? So I remember booking like 30 hours of flight time in advance, so it was already on my schedule. And when it was all said and done, between the plane not being available and the teacher not being available, or me being out for some reason or another, I literally got 3 hours in New York before we ended up moving to Delaware. And then I just said, you know what, forget about this for now. And then it was interesting. I had a vendor who we used to hire programmers for one of my last companies with. He flew out and he flew up to Delaware and he said, "Man, your airport is so close." I'm thinking, close? I guess Philly is only 45 minutes away. I guess that's kind of close. No, no, no. I'm talking about Summit. I go, Summit? What the hell did you fly in on? Because he was coming from the West Coast. He goes, I flew in on a Cessna. I go, from the West Coast? He goes, well, I fly along the southern border, hitting all my clients along the way, stopping their locations. Like when I'm done here, I'm going to New York, and then I'll fly the northern corridor, hit my clients going back home. And I'm like, oh man, I have 3 hours on my license. I've always wanted to fly. Just one of those things I wanted to do. I just never got to it. And really, one time, right around the same time, Beth kept saying, you got to get a hobby. You have no hobbies. I go, my hobby is work and then family.
Yeah.
There's no time for, when you have your own business, there's no time for hobbies. It's like, it's really difficult to find time for hobbies. So the good wife that she is, she went out for Christmas that year, bought me the headphones, all the gear that went with it that you needed, and signed me up for like 20 hours of licenses and prepaid for the 20 hours as license. So it's prepaid, it's on the books, put it on my schedule so that there's nothing there, nothing can get booked in the way,
Wow.
and started flying again. And I really enjoyed it. And then my youngest son, Turner, wanted to do the same thing. And so when he turned 14, we got him a bunch of lessons. And long story short, it was cheaper to buy a plane than to rent the plane and have more accessibility to it. So we ended up buying a small, rental, cheap, trainer plane, basically, just something for us to get around in. And the two of us got our licenses.
Wow. That is amazing. So what kind of, do you still own that plane?
Yeah, it's a 1955 or 1960
Wow.
Beechcraft.
Wow.
Can't
I
remember.
I didn't know that a plane would last that long. That's amazing.
They don't make things like they used to.
For sure. For
No,
sure.
they're required every year. You'd have to take your plane in to get what they call an annual servicing, which is
Right.
usually a couple grand. And that what's supposed to happen is that plane's supposed to leave that shop in the exact same working order as it rolled off the showroom floor back when it was first produced.
Oh, wow.
So they have to tear the whole plane. They literally take a ton of stuff off the plane. They go through it with a microscope, and they check everything top to bottom. And like I said, it's usually a couple grand a year. But when that comes out, it's mint, just like it was when maybe the body may not be in the same. It might have a little more wear and tear inside, but from a mechanical standpoint, it's tip top.
I wanted to take lessons. I actually started, a gentleman I worked for was taking lessons, and I would ride in the back seat, which is not a fun when you're doing touch and goes at a regional airport at 102 degrees outside. It wasn't very fun, and a 152 or something like that. I don't remember, but it was tiny. I was a little smaller back then, but I got the bug myself. The problem that I have, and what was ultimately the downfall was that when I was an air traffic controller in the Navy, after working, I don't know, an 18-hour run, I started developing these ocular deals in my eyes, field of vision, and eventually the entire side of my field of vision was gone. And so I ended up having to go to flight surgeon. I had to get tested, and there were multiple blind spots in my field of vision. And then I have the ocular migraines that removed some of my vision, and that not physically qualified me as a pilot. And so that was the end of my pilot days. When that happened. Although I do have a certificate, I just am MPQ'd as it relates to that. I could still control aircraft, but I had to have supervisors in place.
You might, if you really want to fly, you might want to get that checked out. Third class medicals have been altered significantly. If you can drive a car, you can fly a plane now.
Really? Well, I will go out and look again. I am excited about that. I'm sure my wife will be equally excited about you telling me that.
She might cut something off.
Not just this, as she's threatened now many times, which has been the problem. I'm just going to quickly, you talked about Paid for Surf, the First Street Corporation, Ad Origin was in there, and then I saw something that was really interesting. Before we really get into what you're doing today, got about 10-15 more minutes. I want to talk about this. Compound Holdings. I was just like, what is that? And I did see a little disclaimer. It says turning houses into homes. Where did that come in? I mean, like, you've already taken me, this way and that way. Let's go ahead and do it again.
Yeah, why not? We, Beth and I have done a lot of home improvements in our own house. The first house we had when we moved down to Delaware, we finished the entire basement ourselves. We had a few people that we brought in for certain things, but most of it we did ourselves. So flooring, tiling, sheetrocking, electrical, all that stuff we've done. So of course you see on TV all these guys flipping homes. I'm like, oh, it's so simple. I'm like, yeah, I know what it takes to put in hardwood floors. I know, maybe it isn't so hard. Let's give it a shot. So we decided that it would make better sense to become, or Beth decided it would make better sense for her to become a real estate agent so she can get the discount buying and selling homes, because it instantly gives you another area of profit that the average flipper doesn't have access to.
Mm-hmm.
So she's like, I want to take this course, but it's like 2 or 3 nights a week and blah, blah, blah. Would you at least come sit with me in the class? I'm like, yeah, I'll come sit with you in class, but I'm going to be working because I got to work on my business, So I'm sitting there working on the business the whole time and just half listening to the whole thing. Halfway through the course, she's like, okay, we got to get ready for the test. I go, no, we don't. Just you do. She says, no, we're both taking the test.
Oh.
I'm like, I wasn't paying attention. I'm half listening to what's going on. I'm focusing on my job here. Long story short, we both passed, both got our licenses.
Oh man.
And so we started.
Very cool.
We started flipping houses. So we figured, let's flip a house and see what happens. So we flipped a house, and it was a 900 square foot house in a small blue collar town. Beautiful, nice neighborhood, just a lot of rundown homes. And this
early mid 2000s, maybe.
This was a 30-year-old home. So
no, I'm talking about the timeline that this is going on.
No, this is a couple of years ago.
Wow.
Prior to that, I should say.
Keep going. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Prior to that, in 2007-8, when the real estate boom was happening right before the crash, we bought a couple of houses for that, because basically at the time our idea, because a couple of people were doing this, friends of ours know, you would buy a home. By the time they finished building the home, the value would be up 10-15 grand above costs. So you basically put your money down, which you don't really have to put your money down. You go to closing and you flip it at closing, and you make it 15 grand. So we bought a couple homes thinking this would be great. So, and I remember the builders calling up. It's like, oh my God, we're so busy. Take your time. We're in no rush. We've got no money down. It doesn't matter to us. And the longer you wait, the more money I make. And then the crash happened before the homes were built. So we rented those homes out for about a decade, but we figured we can also do the flipping. So we decided to do some house flippings, and every house we built, we basically had bidding wars on the homes for, in the first day that we put them live because we built them nice,
Hmm.
and we made money on every home. Of course, we made some mistakes here and there that, just look at little things here and there, that over improvements, or, why not watching the legal bills when you're putting certain things together. But all in all, we made good money on all the homes. We had some fun doing it. My wife chopped her finger off in one home. It was Christmas Eve, and this was a couple years ago, and she goes, I'm going to go down to the house and finish working it and do some more work on the hardwood floors. I go, it's Christmas Eve. We're going to family's house at like 1. She said, "No, I'm just going to go down for it was like 6 in the morning. She said, I'm going to go down for a couple hours. I'm like, I'll come. She goes, no, you don't have to come, because we had an arrangement that if I didn't want to help with the work, I didn't have to help. I'm like, yeah, if I don't have to help, I don't have to help. But you know how that goes.
Yeah.
I got to help.
Too well.
So we head down there. We literally got there, and I'm down there measuring the piece going around the stove, and I'm getting the measurements ready. And all of a sudden, the saw goes off. The table saw. I can't think today. The table saw goes off, and it shuts off immediately. And she's screaming and yelling, dancing around, holding her finger, telling me, "Find my thumb. It's on the floor."
Oh, geez.
Now, thankfully, it only
This
nicked.
is an on-air podcast first.
It only
We lost
cut
an
the top.
appendage.
It copped the top, but it didn't cut the finger off. So we raced,
Mm,
had it looked at,
mm.
and got it taken care of. And guess where we ended up after she got it taken care of? Back to the house to do some more work. We still had 4 hours left.
Yes,
So-
I will not be messing with Beth.
So when we
I
say
knew
we
that
put-
before these stories, but now I absolutely will not be messing with her at all.
So now when we say we put blood, sweat, and tears into the homes, we did, literally.
Oh my God, that is
And we had to
awesome.
repaint all the blood all over the room and everything. So, but we had some fun doing that.
Well, Rich Kahn, before we get into Anura and Izenga, is there anything else in this wild ass world that you have lived that I have missed or overlooked that is relevant to us getting up to speed? I mean, I just want to make sure that if you flew a space mission or something, I'm just trying to figure it out.
What do I look like, Homer Simpson? Been a pilot, been all that stuff. No, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I'm missing, but as I'm getting older and starting to forget things, so we'll go on if I think
I
of
have to
something
write
else.
things down. Well, look, I met you, as I said early on here, I met you in New York, and it was at at the time, a LeadsCon East, I believe they were still calling that, at the Hilton. And we met in a room, I remember, and we sat down and we were discussing the council, and we were discussing what I could do for you if you decided to join. And I walked away from that conversation because I thought, man, this is a guy, the way that you explained why it was important that if you did join, that this needed to be a good investment of your not only money but your time. And you made it very clear that you work in and on the business, and that this is a big deal for you if you were going to join. And I walked away thinking, oh man, this is my guy. This is the kind of guy that I want more of on the council. I want more interaction with these type of people, and I want to get them exposed. And so I was super excited about just even the opportunity. And at the time, you owned a company, and you were running with a bunch of frogs, which hasn't changed much, but when I walked by your booth, it looked like a jungle, and that was Izenga at the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So how did you go from, home builder, possible Olympian, a fighter pilot, all of the things that we've discussed, selling cell phones to people and beating all the sales records? How did you end up with Izenga?
Well, I had an idea for a company back in the late 90s where people could actually post their companies, bid for a position so they can outbid each other on who's going to be higher up on the list than anybody else. And I thought it was a great idea, but I knew I had in my mind, actually, this is one of the few times I've actually written a business plan for one of my businesses. Most of my businesses nowadays, it's up here.
Yeah.
I don't
I
have
know.
a business plan.
Yeah.
So, and hence people see sometimes it runs that way. But again, you got to be flexible, right? So I built a business plan because I knew I had to go out and get funding. I figured I needed at least $5 million to get this project off the ground. And the name of the company. I wanted something because the traditional way you name a business in the internet is some kind of nonsensical name, Yahoo, Google,
Yeah.
AltaVista, just these weird names, that made no sense to
Some
what the business
ancient
was.
Greek term.
Yeah, they
Yes.
come from some weird place. So I've said, I want to represent something that's quick, fast, zip, zing. And I said, you know what, EZANG would be a great name for a company. So that became the name on the business proposal. Then we started doing some research, and I went out, I got a hypothetical business appraisal on the business, which cost me like 10 grand. I went out to different investors, and I did the dog and pony show, as they call it, trying to raise capital, and realized that's not one of my skills. So I said, all right, so let me take an aspect of that and at least start to put things together. And over the years, as I was trying to get funding for it, I realized instead of building a real search engine, which is part of what I wanted to do, and then roll in the paid ads, because model didn't exist then. Let me start with a meta search engine where I can scrape data legitimately. You're allowed to scrape data from like Yahoo and Microsoft at the time. And there was DMOZ, and there's these companies that you had some data where you can scrape it, and I can make it a meta search engine. It's a lot cheaper to build this way. And somewhere in the middle of that, I saw the proposal for Google when they were raising their first round of funding, which talked about bidded ads. I'm like, damn, they took my idea. But again, I couldn't get the funding. I couldn't get the idea off the ground. So we decided to start a company, and we started with a certain aspect of it being a meta search engine. We tried to come up with something else that would be kind of cool with it. So Beth and I sat down and came up with the idea to do a like contest search engine. And if you remember back in the day, a company called I1.
Don't remember it, but I mean, yeah,
It was basically
I'm 53 years old, equally, problem with memory.
So essentially, at the time, it was a really cool engine where you can go there and everything had little points attached to every link on the page. And if you clicked on a link to go visit a customer, you get a couple points. If you did a certain action, you get a
Okay,
couple
yes,
points.
yeah, I know the concept is for sure.
So we did something similar, but a very simplistic version of it using multi-level marketing. So in other words, if you came to my site and signed up, every time you visited Ezanga, you would get an entry into a contest for a giveaway. Then if you referred somebody, you would get an additional entry into the contest for every point they had, and it would go 5 levels deep. So you had people that could generate some serious, leverage if they were the ones promoting our site. So we decided to put this together, and we would give away $1,000 a month. So the first place person won $500, and we had like a virtual hat that would randomly choose the winners. In the second place and the third place, we get like $100 or $200, and eight positions got like I think it was like $50 each. We did that and a T-shirt for advertising. And we had like, in no time, we had like 30, 40,000 people that were growing, using this thing and growing great, but it wasn't making any money. Every dollar coming in was getting spent. So I said, all right, we got to do something to make some money with this site because we need to grow. So let's advertise. I have some friends in the industry where I can get some ads where they'll let me advertise their product for them and I'll make some money. So it became an affiliate of the day. And I started buying traffic, but I said, I don't want to go to like Yahoo or the big boys because they're expensive. And it's going to be really difficult to make those numbers work as an affiliate. So I said, let me go to some of the alternative search engines and let me see if I can buy from them, because I can probably buy from them for 2 or 3 cents a click. And if I can deal with the quality difference, I can make it work. So as I started doing it, realizing this fraud. Like I didn't know what it was initially, but I'm like, something's not right there. I'm getting clicks that aren't real people. Something's not right. So I said, let me figure this out. So I sat down on a piece of paper and drew out some ideas and some concepts and some formulas, and came up with the conclusion that we were buying fraud from these companies. So I said, you know what? Let's fix this. So I took it and put it into a spreadsheet. So I take all my data from different points, load it into my own custom spreadsheet, and run it and come up with what I had to adjust in order to get away from, so avoid buying the fraud. Then I got to a point where the data was sophisticated enough, I was able to go back to my vendor, and I'll leave them nameless because they're still around. Very good company, I'm really happy with them, but we basically talked about, I started getting credits, and they said, well, if you can provide proof of exactly what you found and how you found it, we'll be happy to give you a credit.
Are you there, Rich?
Because they'll be able to use it in their for $45,000 on 1 day's worth of spend. So in fraud. So the VP of the company said, okay, you and I need to sit down and discuss because these credits are coming in pretty fast and furious, and we need to figure out what's going on. So sat down with him at an ad tech in New York City, and he says, what are you guys doing? Because I've got a team of a dozen or so PhDs. All they do is they run through these numbers. Now they're West Coast, so we get a report from you around 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning your time, which means it's like 3 in the morning their time. So by the time they walk into the office, you've got a credit, you've got undeniable proof, and all this other stuff. Like, how you doing it? So I basically made a presentation of what this process I put together, and he turned around to me and he said, you know what? It's funny because right now we consider you guys our unofficial traffic advisors.
I lost you again. Can you hear me? Hello? We may be experiencing some technical difficulties.
So I said, you know, I like
Oh, Rich,
there we go.
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Just coming back in. There you go.
Rich, can you?
I can hear you. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you froze for a second.
The joys of computers.
I'll fix it in post, but you know, what I got last, and I think that I want to go. They considered you their official traffic advisor. That was where we were last.
Gotcha. So I decided to name the product at the time Traffic Advisors, and that became the growth of our fraud solution. And we spent, I remember in 2010 releasing a press release that we had over $5 million in R&D in Traffic Advisors studying fraud and fixing fraud. And we continued, that was 2010. That's prior to most of the fraud vendors that are out in the marketplace came out. We already had that much in.
We are definitely experiencing some sort of technical difficulty. I will work on this to get it back to where it looks good once we have it done.
So we've continued to. Stand by. You're coming in now.
I'm wondering what's going on.
You there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you.
We're almost to the finish line.
I wonder if we broke GoToMeeting. I thought we broke GoToMeeting.
That's not hard to do. That is not hard to do, trust me.
Well, yeah. Long story short, we ended up fixing, solving a problem. We had clients that were using other fraud solutions that.
I think what we're going to do is we're going to stop it and clip it in, okay?
Yeah. I notice you're not wearing a different shirt though.
I am. I actually have my
I just did a wardrobe change. I got the same shirt. I was eating crabs last night. I had to keep careful.
Hey, everybody. I want to interrupt this for just a brief second. We had a small technical glitch that actually in the matrix interrupted this great conversation I was having with Rich. And so fast forward, here we are 24 hours later. I think we fixed our problem. Rich graciously has done a wardrobe change and is back in the shirt that he was wearing yesterday. And I unfortunately did not adhere to the rules that we set, and I'm with my Baby Yoda shirt. But we were asking Rich, why Ezanga? Why Anura? We went through the entire history of what Rich has done from school to where he is today. And I met him at Ezanga, or at least while he was at Ezanga. And it was interesting because I knew then what Ezanga was, and then all of a sudden Anura pops up. So Rich, help me understand, like, what was Ezanga, why, and then the transition into Anura.
Sure. So just giving you a little bit of history, like we started this, I had a couple other different things that I was working on, and I had actually this great idea back in the late 90s to build a bidded search engine. So basically people can come and search different aspects of the internet, because at the time the big 800-pound gorilla in the space was Yahoo, and they were more of an index. So they weren't considered a search engine, but of course you could have some basic search functionality at the time. So I had this idea of building an ability to search for information that you're looking for because it's required. It's almost like walking into the Mall of America and trying to find your way around. You need that directory. You need that search engine to find your way around. So I had this idea that not only could you find information, but people can actually pay like a premium add-on in Yellow Pages to have a bigger location or a more prominent location. And then whoever paid more could get a better location. And I thought it was a great idea. Went around trying to get funding for it. I did a hypothetical business appraisal on it, which cost me like 10 grand, and flew all over the country, doing the dog and pony show, trying to sell to different advertisers and whatnot. I mean, to different investors, and found out that one of my skills is not in raising capital. So I realized I'm not going to raise capital. Let's bootstrap it. And this is where I became really good at bootstrapping. So I said, let's bootstrap this. Let's take one of the concepts and see what I can do. I can't build an official search engine that's going to have spiders running around the internet catching stuff because I needed money. I realized that I needed around 5 million to get that idea off the ground. So I decided to look at more of a meta search engine where I would just build a simple scraper that would scrape information from like Yahoo and all the different search engines and DMOZ and whatever was available at the time, bring it all together, organize it, and spit it out. And that would just be some basic writing of code, much more cost effective to build. And I remember sitting at lunch with one of my friends. We were talking about the concept. He loved the concept. And he says, Rich, I just found something. You should read this. And it was the investor prospectus for Google. And their prospectus essentially showed that they were going to build this bidded search engine. Everything I was talking about, I'm like, being built into the system. I'm like, they got the funding though, I didn't. So anyway, so it was a great idea. To this day, it's still a multi-billion-dollar idea. So anyway, I didn't capitalize in it so well. Anyway, so I launched the business plan that I was running around with was a company called Ezang, E-Z-A-N-G. And the concept was every one of these companies out there, Yahoo, Alta Vista, all these companies that were coming out, the kind of the thing was to have a nonsensical name for your business. So I figured I don't want to come up with something that says Zippy Search or something like that. I want something traditionally named in the internet fashion. So looking for something that's quick, Zip, Zing, Zang, and then all of a sudden E-Zang came out to be the name we wanted to use. And once I realized I couldn't get funding, I had to come along and reposition the site and bootstrap something different. We came up with the idea of doing a contest search engine. So I sat down with Beth and said, okay, let's do a contest search engine. I said, we got to come up with a name for it. She goes, why don't we use the same name we used before? You use Ezang. I'm like, all right, punch it in. Some Japanese company, scooped it up because it means something in Japan. So it was an ideal term for them. And I'm like, all right, can't do anything with that. She says, well, just slap an A on the end of it and call it a day. So we did, Ezanga. So we built a contest.
Damn, I was hoping for some like James Bond type thing.
Nope, it's pretty straightforward and simple.
Slap an A on it and call it a day.
Yeah, simple.
Very Beth-like, by the way, very Beth-like.
Definitely, simple solution to a complex problem, right?
Yes.
So we put this together, and it was a contest search engine. Essentially, every time you came to the site, you would earn an entry into our giveaway. And every month we gave away 10 prizes, starting with, the first price was $500 in cash down to $50 cash, and everybody got a shirt. I said I hopped on and won this T-shirt. It was kind of a cool thing to have. And we started running it. We were giving away $1,000 a month, and basically it was a break-even proposition. It wasn't making any monies, which is not the concept I was looking for. I was trying to pay the bills. And so we said, you know what? I know advertising. I've been doing online digital marketing to some extent. That's been evolving over the last 10 years or whatever it was. So I said, let's try marketing. And I've got a couple of clients that's in the space that have advertisements they're trying to drive traffic to. I can probably get my hands on those and drive traffic to it and make a spread. And so we started doing that. And instead of buying from the tier 1 search places, which were very expensive still, let's try something else. Let's try buying from some smaller alternative search engines that have traffic, maybe not a lot of traffic, but enough traffic that combined together could make sense. And they're averaging selling it for a couple cents a click. It would definitely be cost effective. If we can make it work, we'll make money. We started doing the advertising and realizing, well, we're not making money. So I'm like, doesn't make sense. We should be making money. Something's going on here. So I started looking at the data, realizing it's fraud. So I said, all right, how do we solve this problem? So I sat down on a piece of paper and mapped out some calculations of what I thought I can do. Then I realized, let me put this into a spreadsheet, and then I started cranking numbers through a spreadsheet, and all of a sudden we started making money. We started eliminating the fraud and making money, because I would go back to my places I was buying advertising from and say, hey, I've got fraud. They said, well, we're not going to make you pay for fraud, so just give us some proof, tell us what you want, we won't pay for the fraud.
With that spreadsheet that you used at the time, what percentage of the traffic was fraud? Based on just the spreadsheet, no big platform that's driving it.
Off the top of my head, I would say it was more than 50%.
50.
50%.
50.
Right.
Holy cow. What I mean, like, without getting crazy, what kind of money did that represent? Like either spend or even lost revenue? What kind of?
Well, let's put it this way. Every day I would put a report together and get it to the company that I was buying traffic from. And I had one main company that I kind of zeroed in on just because they were good to work with and the cost and everything else. And the biggest day of refund that I was requesting was $45,000.
That was a day, a single day?
One single day.
Oh,
so I was probably spending somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 a day in advertising spend, and that day was $45,000 in credits.
Oh my God!
So I said to him, "Here's my proof. Here's my stuff." And he says, "Yep, we're going to give you the credit." They gave us the credit. He says, "But I want to meet with you. Something's not, we want to talk to you about this because obviously you're finding a lot of fraud and see what's going on." So I sat down and presented our fraud solution that we were working on. We didn't have a name for it. It was just making me more money. It was helping us grow as a company. And he said, I have a team of PhDs that are going through the data constantly. And of course, we're West Coast, you're East Coast. They walk in at 8 o'clock in the morning and your report's already on their desk with, detailed explanation that's undeniable it's fraud, and you're funding it faster than we can. And he wanted to understand how we were doing it. We try to give him, without giving secret sauce, try to give him an idea of what we're constantly working on. And he said, right now we consider you our unofficial traffic advisors. So I said, I like that name. So we bought the name, and that became the product, Traffic Advisors. In fact, there's a press release out. It's searchable. In 2010, we were working on the project now for 5 years. We had already invested, we calculated, over $5 million in R&D in the product. And this is around the time that everybody else started popping up with their fraud solutions. And we had already invested from a bootstrap.
It's the same 5 million you could have had Google.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Sorry about the salt there, Rich. I'm just like,
yeah, just pour it in there. Why don't you? So ultimately, though, it was nice because we were taking money that we're making and investing into this product and growing it. So anyway, we decided to continue, and we've continually invested in the product and grown it, but we've only used it for ourselves. And then all of a sudden, I had somebody come to me, and it was kind of a interesting call. He said, "I'd like to license your fraud technology for my organic traffic." I'm like, organic traffic by the definition is generally free because a fraudster's not getting paid to do anything with this. Yeah. Why would you need it? And he's, well, the traffic I'm buying from you is cleaner than the organic traffic we have. Mm-hmm. So we jerry-rigged the whole thing together in like a pseudo way to do it and say, here, I'll give it to you for free right now because I just want to see if this will work. Let's test it out. And sure enough, 30% of his traffic that was organic was fraudulent. I mean, undeniable fraud. So what it was, and we see this to this day, it was a simple bot that would take advantage of organic listings to try to build up a social profile and then perpetrate fraud after the fact. It was just complex. That's a whole nother conversation, but it was definitely fraud.
Was it all the way to like form fills and things of that nature, or just traffic?
There was just general traffic in his situation. He had some e-commerce transactions going on, but it was more or less right around, it was still performance-based marketing, but he was getting e-commerce transactions that were getting placed that were fraudulent, and the traffic landing on the page was 30% of it was fraudulent. It wasn't 30% of his transactions. It was just overall 30% of the traffic was making it. It was eye-opening, and this was probably like 2013, 14, something like that. And we started getting more people requesting to use our technology outside of our network. Our original stand was, hey, if you want to buy traffic that's clean, buy it from us. But there's a bigger opportunity with all the multi-channels. So we said, all right, let's take a look and see if we really have something, because we sat down as a group and said maybe we should launch this fraud solution as a standalone product. And a lot of people, everybody on the company was like, yeah, we should do it. We have a really good solution. I'm like, well, do we really have a good solution? Because if I need to go out and get a second mortgage on my house in order to support this, because I know I don't know how to raise funds and I'm going to do it myself, do I want to take a second mortgage on my house to really invest in this? Do we really have something special? So in 2015, we spent a year, dropped at the end of the day over 100 grand in test marketing budgets across all the major search engines. We were already tied in with all the technical true competitors in our marketplace at this point because our clients had us, use test out different solutions. And so we had the perfect test bench to find out if we really had a better solution. And we ran a series of tests over the course of the first quarter, found out we crushed the competition. So I said, you know what, run it again. We ran it again. Different metrics we were looking at, we still crushed the competition. I said, run it one more time. I'm not ready to take a second mortgage on my house just yet. But after the third test come back that no matter how you slice and dice it, we had a better solution. I said, all right, Beth and I agreed, let's go ahead
Let's go on the debt.
let's do it. Yeah, let's give everything up that we worked for and put it on the line for a technology that's untested yet with clients. So let's see what we can do. Sure enough,
So you were so smart all the way up until this last moment, right?
It's like I have my dream sitting there, and all of a sudden, let's just try it. So we put the whole thing together. 2016, we had beta testing going on with a major company that absolutely gave us rave reviews about it. We finished the final touches on the dashboard and rolled it out in 2017. And what was nice is as we rolled it out and went live, which was actually April 1st of 2017 with the product, we had to come up with a new name for it because Traffic Advisors had become synonymous with our publisher management platform. So we sat down, we were in Vegas at, I think, a LeadsCon, and we were out to breakfast, and Beth and I were like, all right, we got to come up with a name. What do we want? So she came up with the name Anura. And I'm like, oh, I like that. Where's that from? She's like, it's the classification or it's the class order or something of a frog in the animal kingdom. I'm like, oh, I love it. It's short, it's sweet. And of course, somebody owned Anura.com and didn't want to relinquish it. So we ended up with Anura.io, which is pretty much a tech, extension.
But didn't you have like frogs in the Zanga brand though?
Correct. So the story behind the frog is that Beth and I moved to Delaware, moved to Frog Hollow Golf Course. So we were building a house.
I thought it was some Africa or some, rainforest.
No, Middletown,
Frog
Delaware.
Hollow, right? Frog Hollow. Okay.
Yep. So we were building a house real quick. We were building a house and a big foundation, and this giant bullfrog jumped into the foundation. And the cement was curing, so you couldn't put a ladder in there to get down to it. And he basically roasted and died in the sun. So before we started all the companies, he decided to dedicate the bathroom above where he died to the frog. So it was all green wallpaper and the frog themes, and it was what it was. So when we were building a Zanga, I say, you know what, it's kind of cool when you see a company that has a mascot. I always like that, kind of like Ask Jeeves had the butler, and everybody had that mascot. So she's like, we're gonna do a frog. So I said, fine, the frog it is, and that's how the frog became the
But was there
mascot.
any connection between that frog that died a horrible death while you built your house to Anura and her picking Anura? I mean,
Well,
it just seems too coincidental.
ultimately, Anura was born inside of Ezanga, and it helped grow Ezanga to what it was, that almost 100 million in sales in its lifetime, and it helped its growth. Without it, we wouldn't have had the growth that we had. So it seemed fitting that since it was born inside of Ezanga to have some kind of tie back, not a direct tie back, but some kind of tie back. So Anura became the name that we used, and it works. And actually, if you look at the site, a couple of the sites, there's a couple of Easter eggs that our programmers have put in, where at the bottom right hand corner of our dashboard's got the little frog. If you click on it, it says hello, stuff like that, just QC stuff. But
Did you pay for that time to program? Was that a billable hour?
They're all in-house, so every hour they spend on the project is a billable hour.
Got it.
So, but all in all, like I said, that's how Anura was born, from all that testing and work. And we didn't build it like most of our competitors are out there. They built it simply to build and license, and just say, hey, this is what we consider fraud, and then you trust that that's what fraud is. That's not how we did it.
One of the things that sticks out to me every time I talk to you, and you and I have had some pretty deep conversations about this, because as you continue to educate the industry, but even from my angle, more importantly, me and the council, one of the things that has stuck out to me is that as I continue to, one, buy into what you're saying, but also validate that through other sources, external sources. Eric Troutman with TCPA.com, when we had him on the stage, you were sitting in the audience, I believe it was in Orlando, and I asked him what the biggest threat in the industry was. He didn't take a second before he said fraud. Fraud could be our biggest threat to even TCPA. And so as you continue to evolve this model and evangelize, Bible in hand out there every day, helping the industry understand that this is a big problem. It's an expensive problem. It erodes profitability. It damages the consumers, that relationship with the consumer, because there's nothing worse than calling somebody that you think that you haven't a legitimate TCPA, Jornaya active prospect, approved third-party lead verification lead, all the check boxes, and you get Mrs. Smith on the phone and Mrs. Smith says, I'm sorry, I have absolutely no idea who you are or what you're talking about. There is a ding that is hit to the consumer, whether that consumer ever will come back or just that consumer now once again hates something about those unwanted calls or the marketers that are out there preying on them. You preach this every day. You go out and you talk to these people every day. How is it received, one, and two, how are you winning people over in that I would imagine difficult journey to convince somebody that you're going to come in and save their day by cutting out 30% of their revenue?
Well, it's like anything else. Again, most people don't realize or feel that they have a fraud problem because they have all the other checks in place. They have, all the other tools that we talk about to validate where the lead came from. It's not a serial litigator. The name matches the phone number and the email address. Everything looks good. They think they're doing everything they should. And it's part of the standards that we have as LeadsCouncil. It's trying to tell people the best practices that they have. And one of the most important pieces, again, from my view, is that very, very top of the funnel. When that lead first starts its journey, you want to know are you dealing with the right person or not, because a fraudster gets around, a human fraudster, I should say, gets around everything because they're human. So if they have a TCPA compliancy box, guess what? They're trained to check that box. If there's, a Google CAPTCHA, they're trained better than I am to click on the right images inside that CAPTCHA.
I hate that, by the way.
Well, they did roll out a new version 3, but again, it's only designed to stop bots.
Which ones have traffic lights?
30%.
Just that one. Just that one.
You're wrong. You're a bot.
I am wrong every time.
But essentially, yeah, that's what's happening. It's so when I talk to these people on the phone, I just spoke to somebody on the phone yesterday, did a demo for them, and they said, look, we have, and they listed beyond, best standards and best practices of what you should be doing for a lead. He goes, but now you got me thinking about this fraud thing. Do we have a fraud problem? I said, I don't know. Do you? He says, well, I go, do you have any signs and symptoms of fraud? And he goes, you know what? Now that you mention it, we're noticing that we're getting an increase in having to push voicemails to leads that are specifically, they're harder to get in touch with. We are getting a few situations where people swear they haven't filled out the form, which was kind of odd. We didn't know what that meant. And I go, it's starting to increase to the point it's on my mind. What do we do? I said, well, there's only one way to find out if you have fraud. We'll do a free trial. Let's do a free pilot program on your traffic and find out if you have a fraud problem. And then if you have a fraud problem, our system will address it for you. But let's first, step one, find out if you have a problem. Because I spoke to somebody today, and a 25% problem yields $200,000 in lost revenues. And it's not a big player, but it's big enough. And he goes, look, even if you found 5%, you're looking at still $30,000, $25,000, $30,000 a month in lost revenues. It still makes sense to do business with you guys. And I said, the only way to find this out is we do the trial. We do the pilot, put the pilot in place, see what's found, and then let's talk about it afterwards. You know, one guy said, what if I have less than 1% fraud? I go, then it probably doesn't make sense to work together. You know, because the way we sell our product is not just, hey, we're going to solve fraud, we're going to increase client demand, we're going to grow your company. We're also going to ROI out our service. It's one of the few services in the chain of lead generation that has an ROI to it, because I'm going to stop the fraud coming in, and you're going to see where it's coming from, so you stop buying it, and that's going to save you more money than the cost of my service. I'm the only one like that. You know, when you have those checks of, is the name matched to email, what's the real savings there? You know, it's a cost, because you want to make sure that they didn't have a fat finger mistake and type in the wrong address. You know, the recording of the transaction to make sure somebody was actually physically typing in and had, that's a CYA. It's in case you get sued down the road, you got your CYA, right? None of them actually have an ROI to it. They have a cost. So a lot of people come to me and say, you know, everybody wants a slice of my pie. You know, I'm trying to build a lead generation company here, and you know, this one wants money for recording, this one wants money for checking to make sure, you know, they're to protect me, and I get it, and there's a reason to have it, but everybody wants a piece. And I go, yeah, the difference is I'm going to pay for myself in the first month. So on a free trial, we'll find out if you have a problem. If you don't have a problem, you'd be the first person I've done this with. But if you don't
have you ever found someone without a problem if they're dealing with online traffic?
I have seen it where the ROI wasn't high enough to work with us, because they were doing a good job and they were very protective, and they didn't spend a lot of money in marketing. So all those factor into the ROI of the product. So I've seen that happen, and that happens from time to time, where they're very, very specific on what they're doing, and they've been doing a process for a long time and it works. But I have a team of people behind it that are doing that to make sure it works. So they're spending, a team of people, let's call it 3 people. Let's say you're spending an average of $5,000 a person, you know, for these resources, or more depending on the level of expertise. You're spending $15,000 to $20,000 a month to fight fraud. Guess what? I'm cheaper. And you have access to my entire team's technology and 15 years worth of development. So, you know, it comes down to that: is it cheaper to build or buy? And in most cases, like I said, it's cheaper for us to help them, because we have the expertise and we have access to a lot more data than their own data set.
Do you really feel, I mean, in your heart, and I know that this is your company, so it's a bit biased, but do you really feel this is possibly the biggest threat to the lead generation space?
I can't see how it's not, only for the fact that I understand what all the other technologies are for, and they're important. I'm not going to downplay their unimportance. They are important, because like I said, if you're a company, you're in a business for 5 years and you get sued just once, you're going to wish you had that recording. You know, it's important to have that. If you're calling people and a fraudster happens to by mistake enter in a serial litigator, and you don't have that scrub on that from like a DNC.com, you're going to wish you had that. You know, so it's those things that are very important. It's like their insurance policies, right? In case stuff happens, you want to make sure you're protected. So they're very important. But the single biggest threat, I think, overall, that's causing a lot of those concerns and generating more issues is the fraud.
Yeah.
They're looking to steal your clients' budgets or your budgets every day.
Well, Rich, look, this has been a long journey, longer than most of the podcast.
The 24-hour podcast.
We are breaking records. I have really enjoyed this. I have known you for a while. Like, you were one of my originals, right? I mean, you came on board shortly after I took over, and although you took a brief pause from, you know, the board seat, you've always been connected at some level, and you've always shown your commitment to the industry and your commitment to the council, which I certainly, from a personal standpoint, appreciate. But then just also from a personal standpoint, you know, I don't know what COVID's going to be like, because when we meet, we hug, right? And we'll have to figure out how to show that love when we meet again without killing each other, literally. But at the end of the day, I have to say this podcast means a lot to me, because I thought I knew you. I thought I knew a lot about you. I thought I knew a lot about your history and your company. And, you know, I focus in on the now and the ad fraud and the impact that has to the space. But just hearing your journey and understanding where you've come from and the path that you've taken, and, you know, the analytical side of your mind, the creative side of your mind, the entrepreneurial side of your mind, which is very, very endearing to me, because that's really the type of council member, board member, and other peer that I kind of gravitate to, because that's kind of my world as well. I like entrepreneurship, and just to listen to how you have put it all on the line, not once, but twice, but several times. And you've had that incredible wife, Beth, along by your side from a lot longer than I even knew. A lot of now what I know about the two of you and even her make a lot more sense. But I would imagine you would agree that as smart as you are, you wouldn't be sitting in your chair in that nice ass pool that you have at home without your spouse by your side. And I certainly can appreciate that. But I just have to be honest, man, this has been a pleasure. I certainly appreciate anything. Is there any last words that you want to part with, or anything I didn't cover that you want to squeeze into the last few minutes?
Well, like I said, I appreciate the relationship with you as well. And these podcasts and the webinars and all the stuff that you do for the industry. I know you're probably one of the hardest working people for the industry. Like, a lot of us are doing stuff for our own companies, and we want to be part of LeadsCouncil for that reason of helping out. But I mean, you live this day in, day out, and you're helping us all, connect with other companies and set the best practices for the industry, so the industry will be here for a long time. And again, just on behalf of us and everybody in the industry, we all appreciate that.
Well, Rich Kahn, you're going to make me cry, and I have not cried yet on one of these things, so I will save it for another time. Good try. Buddy, thank you very much, man. This has been great, and I really appreciate the time.
Thanks again. I appreciate it. Thanks.